Hashtag truth on the ass.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Another season recap podcast for you guys to check out today, but also make sure you have checked out our 2018 NBA draft preview shows. One with Coles Wicker, one with Sam Vicini. They were posted a couple of days ago. There's going to be at least two more draft shows next week as well. Another draft preview covering the players that we haven't covered in those first two, plus a mock draft as well. And then, of course, once the NBA draft is finished, there'll be an immediate reaction, immediate recap podcast there. And probably the week after, do a couple more bits of NBA draft stuff for Dynasty Leagues in particular. Speaking of Dynasty Leagues, I am looking now to fill out some new Dynasty Leagues for this upcoming season. If you are unaware, I currently run 6 Dynasty Leagues, 5 30-team leagues, 2 of those head-to-head 30 teams, 2 of those head-to-head 30-team with real salary cap, 1 of those a 30-team rotisserie league, and a 16-team league that includes fake contracts and salaries as well. Now we're going to be introducing a new bunch of Dynasty Leagues. We're going to be having 2 new Roto Dynasty Leagues, 3 new head-to-head Dynasty Leagues, and for the first time, a Points Dynasty League. And I don't like the points concept for redraft, but in Dynasty, I think there's some real value in having a Points League in Dynasty format. So we're going to be doing that one as well. As always, priority access to these new Dynasty Leagues. These are all paid leagues, by the way. Majority $50. There is one of them. It is a $100 entry league. The priority to these leagues for entry goes to Patreon subscribers. So you can head to patreon.com/redrock_bball. Support the show. Get priority access there. Get access to the Slack channel as well. So you can discuss with me and other Patreon subscribers issues relating to basketball fantasy or anything in general. But for the spots that aren't filled up by the Patreon subscribers, over the last day, I've tweeted out a link to a Google form, which is basically just a questionnaire. It's an application process, indicating which leagues you'd like to be in your fantasy basketball experience, dynasty basketball experience as well. And I'll be going through all of that and sending out invites in the coming weeks as I start to fill out these leagues. At the moment, I've written the rules for the Points League and we're filling that out at the moment, but get all your applications in for those Dynasty Leagues. I guarantee you they're going to be really, really interesting and competitive. So if you want to be a part of those, either become a Patreon subscriber or fill out the application process to get any spots that are left over after the patrons have snapped up all those spots that they want. Of course, we will still be doing redraft leagues later on in the year, head-to-head leagues, including the Champions League, Roto League, including the Champions League. We're going to do some points leagues this year as well, and also some draft-only style leagues. So really expanding the listener league format this season. So make sure you're all tuned in and on the lookout for info regarding that. All right, Michael Bolton. He's been waiting patiently as I get all that information off my chest.
Let's get to it.
Let's talk Portland Trailblazers in today's season recap podcast. I guess a decent enough season for the Blazers, regular season-wise anyway, 49-33, finishing third in the Western Conference. That finishing third is a little bit not misleading, but the fact they were like one game away from 5th or 6th shows how close the Western Conference was, and then they ended up getting swept by the 6th-seeded New Orleans Pelicans in the first round of the playoffs. They do have the 24th pick in the upcoming NBA draft. And we look at their free agency situation. Only one unrestricted free agent. That's Eddie Davis. But a couple of interesting restricted guys, Jusuf Nurkic and Shabazz Napier. Of course, Nurkic, the more interesting of those two. Pat Connaughton and CJ Wilcox are both restricted as well. And then you've got Wade Baldwin the fourth, Georgios Papagiannis, and Jake Lehman as non-guaranteed deals for this coming season. So all those big deals, the shit ones like Myers Leonard and Evan Turner, are still on the books. And then a really big decision they have to make with Jusuf Nurkic, especially with Zachy Collins waiting in the wings after a decently impressive second half of the season. So lots of stuff for them to decide on. Do they ever decide to split up that McCollum and Damian Lillard pairing? That's going to change things around quite a bit. Will Mo Harkless ever be consistent? How about our mate, the Chief?
Sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be shit.
Who knows what Al-Farouq Aminu is going to bring on any given night. There is a fair bit to talk about with this team. They finished the season as the 19th ranked team in pace, 15th in offense, 8th in defense. And I think that defense, considering the personnel that they have, is quite a surprise. Yeah, Mo Harkless is quite a good defender. So is the Chief. And Jusuf Nurkic provides something. But they were really good defensively in the backcourt as well. A lot of credit there goes to Terry Stotts, also to CJ and Dame. But I think a lot of that goes to the way Stotts played and schemed those guys up to provide some solid enough defense where they weren't getting toasted, which had been the case for them in prior years. For a team that does have CJ and Dame, they were only 18th in the league in three-point attempt rate, basically because no one else is really taking threes. Aminu's spotty, Harkless is spotty, Turner's invisible, Nurkic isn't taking threes. So that's a little bit troublesome, the fact that they took so few threes, even though they hit 37% of them overall, 11th best in the NBA, just not really taking enough there. Strong rebounding team. They were 10th in offensive rebounding, 5th in defensive rebounding percentage. They blocked a decent amount of shots, but in true Terry Stotts style, they just don't generate any steals. They were 26th in the NBA in steals, 30th in the NBA in assists as well. And those lower steal numbers is what really does prevent Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum in particular from not being ranked 5 to 10 spots higher. So Lillard could very easily be a top 7, top 6 sort of a player, and McCollum could be a top 20 guy, but they just don't generate those steal numbers. Lillard was 9th for this year, and McCollum was 52nd, a little bit of a down year for CJ. But there is reasons for that, which again we'll talk about it as we go through all this stuff in more detail as we tend to do on these show. But let's start with Lillard. About to turn 28. He played 73 games, 37 minutes, 27 points, 3 triples, 4.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 1.1 steals, and 0.4 blocks. 44, 92, and 36. A true shooting of 59, a usage of 30.5. So they're all really strong numbers. The 9th ranked player overall this season, but there were a few things that were a little bit of a drop-off for Lillard this season. He scored fewer points per game. His field goal percentage dropped slightly. But impressively, his steals did go up by 0.2. His assists went up by 0.7. He hit 0.2 extra threes per game and a 2 percentage point increase on his free throw percentage. And all that actually helped him rise from the 17th ranked player to the 10th ranked player this season, just from those little extra bumps, mainly that bump in his assists after he fell below 6 last season and jumped up to 6.5 this season. So Lillard, he's a strong end of the first round, start of the second round type of a guy. He's a guy that we had in that discussion when me and Greg talked about Victor Oladipo yesterday on the Pacers recap podcast. Who would you take first? I think what Lillard did there feels a little bit more sustainable than Oladipo's numbers. We talked about the really high steals and blocks and high field goal percentage stuff from Vic, and maybe even if there's miniature drop-offs in that, it could be a 2, 3, 4, 5 spot fall in the ranking. So I think Lillard feels just a little bit safer there with him. We always hear this talk of Lillard being an Iron Man, doesn't miss any games, but we do have to realize that now over the past 3 seasons, Lillard has missed 23 games. He played all 82 games for the first few years of his career, sure, but since then 75, 75, and 73, and by no means is that bad at all. But again, you'll hear this narrative spouted all the time. Lillard's going to play 82 games and he's only missed this amount of games over his entire NBA career. But that's fine. But they've all come in the last 3 years. And every time at Christmas, weirdly enough, he has suffered an injury every single Christmas for the last 3 years. And the ankles were a real bother for him this season. So, just again, past narratives, which are 3 years old, don't necessarily hold true. You don't expect 82 games out of Lillard. Every every night or anything like that. Or sorry, every season. You just shouldn't be doing that because, again, he hasn't been horribly injured, but he hasn't been playing every single game, and he's been missing chunks of time around that Christmas period. But if that Christmas period then shifts to March, then it's the playoffs, and he's not infallible, is what I'm trying to get at. But obviously, he's still an excellent player who had a really strong season, his best fantasy season that he has had in his career. He was really, led the team in box score, plus, minus, super strong PER, massive win shares. Clearly the guy that leads this team in a pretty significant way. Led the team in on-off as a 9.4 as well. Curiously, the next player we're going to talk about, CJ McCollum, was actually a negative 2.2 in the on-off metrics, which, again, we can't put everything into that, but it wasn't CJ's best season. I think that's a fair thing to say. CJ probably wouldn't want to hear that himself. He was sort of middling PER 17, true shooting below average, box score plus minus 0.4. It was far from CJ's best season. But let's have a look at actually what he did this year. 81 games. He's going to turn 27 a few months into the season. 21.5 points, 2.3 triples, 4 rebounds, 3.4 assists, a steal, 0.4 blocks, 44, 84, and 40% from 3. 27 usage and 54 true shooting. So they're strong numbers. It's still good. He's the 52nd ranked player, but he was 28th the year before. He was 32nd the year before that. So what changed? Well, the major change that we saw here with what CJ did is his field goal percentage from last season went from 48 to 45. The 48, and when he had that big 15-16 season and shot 45%, I was skeptical because he was hitting such a huge percentage of his mid-range shots. I went, you know what, these long twos that he's taken, he's hitting them at 46 or 47%, which he was hitting them at. I thought maybe that's not going to continue. He made me look stupid the next year because he bumped his percentage. He went to 48% from the field, which was nonsense. But then this season, it did come back down to 44%, and that's a drop-off there from what he'd done previously. Also lost 8 percentage points on his free throw numbers, which, it's still really good at 83, but he was 91 the year before, so that cost him some of that value. He scored 1.4 fewer points per game, 0.2 fewer assists per game, and the 3-point percentage dropped by 0.2% there as well, and all those things contributed to him dipping his overall value for the season. In terms of looking at McCollum, he's strong, he's solid. He's not a guy that I would be placing massive value on. To me, as a guy, again, his best value outside of points was his three-pointers for the year, and we can get three-pointers in many different forms later on in drafts. Steals, if that was at 1.7 steals, he'd be such a more valuable player, but it's just never going to be that way. It doesn't feel for CJ. No, he's not a strong rebounder. The assists are pretty good, but he's a guy that, say you're comparing him with a Bradley Beal, I would take Beal over him pretty much every time. And not to say I don't like McCollum, but I just think that his game is a little bit limited for what he does in fantasy, and I think he ends up getting drafted probably a little bit high most years. Like his ADP this season was 27th, and clearly wasn't able to perform to that level during the course of the 2017-18 season. Let's talk Jusuf Nurkic now, who in his age 23 season played 79 games, 26 minutes per game, 14-9 with almost 2 assists, 0.8 steals, and 1.4 blocks, 51 from the field, 63 from the line, a really disappointing true shooting of 53% on 26% usage. Now, when Nurkic arrived in Portland last trade deadline, he was massive, and he did it a couple of ways. One of those was he played 30 plus minutes per game, and secondly, he really got the assists going, really channeling his inner Nikola Jokic. It didn't happen so much this season, and by so much this season, it didn't really happen at all. His assist numbers for this year were basically the same as they were last year, except he played 5 extra minutes. His per 36 assist numbers went from 3.1 down to 2.4. And if you have a look at what he did during his time in Portland last season, he averaged 3.2 assists per game in 29 minutes. If we want to be fair and look at the per 36 rate, his 2 seasons in Portland, he went from 3.9 assists down to 2.5 assists per 36 minutes. His block rate dropped, his steal rate dropped, he shot worse from the field, he shot worse from the free throw line. The only thing that he did improve per 36 was his scoring numbers as he got his usage up a little bit higher this season. Defensively, he was still pretty strong for this team. Offensively, really struggled with that efficiency problem. And this is a guy who's never had an above average true shooting percentage. And as a big man, that's really piss poor. A career true shooting of only 51%. 53 this year, 53 the year before that, and then 46 and 48 in his first 2 seasons. That is a real concern. It's something that we can't be writing off. It's 4 seasons in now. We shouldn't be expecting 55% from Nurkic or 75% from the free throw line. We've heard this, oh man, look, he's improved his free throws, and we see it all the time. And especially when he does it in a preseason setting and he hits 75%, people are like, solved, problem solved. And then this bullshit rears its head. So from now on, I don't think we should be banking on that. If you're drafting Jusuf Nurkic, you're drafting him expecting a negative 0.15 to a negative 2 contribution in free throw percentage, which is pretty bloody close to punt. Depends on who else you've added onto your team. So if he does come out and shoot 74%, you're surprised. But you're not banking on that improvement by a bullshit 5-game sample size you see across Europe in summer or through preseason in September. So that is something I think that we need to pay attention to with Nurk. Does he come back to this team? What sort of contract does he get? I really have no idea. I don't think that he is a future star on a team. We saw Terry Stotts get pissed with him, play a lot more Ed Davis, play a lot more Zach Collins. Nurkic's struggles at time offensively. But more importantly, yeah, he can defend well, but switch stuff really can bother him. And that's why we saw his minutes drop as much as they did this season. Plus, the presence of Zach Collins, who is stretchy, who is switchy a little bit. He's not great defensively, but he's still quite young. And the fact that maybe someone decides they need to offer Nurkic a big amount of money, yeah, that could really put a cramp in things. Now, if Nurkic goes to another team, say Dallas throws a big offer at him, unlikely, but that's a possibility. Say they do that, and he comes in and he plays 31 minutes per night, then yeah, the numbers are going to be pretty good. He'll probably average 16 points and 12 rebounds and give you 2 blocks, and maybe he gets you 1.5 steals, and maybe he gets back to 2.5 to 3 assists. I don't know at this point, but we do have to bake into that the percentages are probably going to be poor with Nurkic. But if he's returning in Portland, I think another season where the minutes aren't approaching 30 is probably a realistic expectation. A guy who has injury problems in the past, a guy who has behavioral issues in the past, a guy that the coach has shown wavering trust in for this season. They're not all things that add up to a guaranteed 30 minutes per night type situation. Let's look at the Chief.
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
Yes, Al-Farouq Aminu. He did finish the season as the 109th ranked player, which I think many people would be surprised about. He played 69 games.
Giggity.
He is 27, will turn 28 in the early portions of the season. 30 minutes per night, 9.3 points and 1.8 triples. Strong rebounding numbers, 7.6 with 1.2 steals, 0.6 blocks. But the percentages, 39.5 from the field, 74 from the line, 37 from 3 for a true shooting of 52%. You'll notice that 3 of the 4 guys I've spoken about so far have been sub 54% of their true shooting, McCollum, Nurkic, and Aminu, and that is obviously not really a very good sign. Now, over the last 20 games of the season, Aminu was playing at a significantly higher level. He was a top 50 player, 11 and 9. He averaged over 2 threes. And it's the steals, the 1.7 steals, and the fact that he got his field goal percentage up to 42% and hit 76% of his free throws that helped him bump there. But for a guy that in some formats has small forward eligibility, that rebounding numbers, the steals, and the decent enough block numbers can be useful. But I think he's a very low upside type of a player. Again, he's probably older than a lot of people anticipate as well. I don't really see, when I look at what he does, where he improves from here. Does he start shooting better? I guess that's a possibility. Has he ever really shot better? Yeah, in 2013-14, when he was with the Pelicans, he shot 47% from the field. The last 3 years, or 4 years, 41, 41, 39, 40. These are not good numbers for shooting. The free throws are all mid to low 70s. Yeah, he's just, at this point, we know he's not a good shooter. He's a very low usage player who gets you rebounds and gets you steals. And in most redraft formats, I wouldn't be excited. In dynasty leagues, he feels like he's a bloke that in 2 years' time won't be getting 30 minutes a night. I feel relatively comfortable about saying that. He doesn't translate as a guy who's going to be still getting 30 minutes a night as he becomes 30 years of age. He provides really good stuff defensively for this team. Second on the team in on-off at plus 4.6. The next highest was Davis at 2.2, less than half of what Aminu's value was in that area. Really good defensive box score, plus minus. Third on the team behind Nurkic and Harkless, marginally behind Harkless, and a pretty strong overall box score, plus minus. Third on the team there behind Lillard and Harkless as well. So the advanced numbers do like him outside of the true shooting and PER, but the win share stuff, the box score plus minus, the on-off, all that stuff seems to like him. I just fear that a decline is going to be on its way for Aminu in the next couple of seasons, and he's not a prolific fantasy contributor most of the time anyway. Shabazz Napier had a very interesting season. He's heading into restricted free agency, as we talked about a little bit earlier. There's easily arguments you can make that he could be a starter on a few teams in the NBA, but yeah, he was really strong when he replaced Lillard the first time around Christmas with that ankle injury, put up some really good games, and then went back into a limited role. And then even when he got another chance later in the season to replace Lillard in a couple of games, was nowhere near the same sort of player that he was in that earlier stint replacing Lillard. And by the time the playoffs came, he was really struggling. Didn't even play only played in 2 of those games against the Pelicans, DNP CD in the other 2. Overall for the season for Shabazz, he is almost 27, so quite old as a restricted free agent. 21 minutes a game, 74 games, 8.7 points, a 3, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.1 steals, 42, 84, 38 for a true shooting of 54%. In terms of per 36 production, he played way more minutes. Last year, 9.7. This year, 20 minutes per game. His points are about the same. He scored fewer threes. He had fewer assists. He had fewer rebounds. He had fewer steals per 36 minutes. But again, because he played such a larger role, that's understandable. He also was able to increase his efficiency from true shooting 53 to 54 as his field goal percentage jumped 3 percentage points and his free throw percentage jumped 6 percentage points while keeping the 3-point percentage the same. If we have a look at what he did as a starter, he started 10 games this season, 33 minutes a game, 15, 4.5, and 4.2. 1.6 steals, 0.3 blocks, shot 41, 88, and 35, true shooting 54, basically the same as what he was doing coming off the bench. Bumped his usage to 21 in that stage, plus 4.5 in his time as a starter. So overall, he held his ground. He's never going to be a great starter, but if he was on a different team and he gets an offer somewhere in restricted free agency, he'd be a guy that you'd consider towards the end of a fantasy draft. Maybe he could average 14, 4, and 5.5, and more importantly, he could push to 1.7 to 2 steals. He is one of these guys on Portland. There aren't many of them. He is one of those guys who can actually generate steals despite the scheme that Terry Stotts has in place. So Shabazz Napier, sort of up and down in terms of his overall value. Held his own, I thought, defensively. Not a great defender, but did quite an admirable job there. And I thought his advanced numbers held up with him pretty well as well throughout the season. So he's someone to watch, but again, we have to remember he is 27 years of age, or he's about to turn 27 years of age. Only played the 4 years in the NBA, so we're already in, pretty much in peak Shabazz time. So maybe he becomes a starter, but maybe you might get 2 years of top 120 production if he ends up going to a different team. Maybe. That's something to bear in mind. Now, Mo Harkless, I thought it was a really disappointing year for Harkless. I know Matt Smith was really big on him heading into the season. I wasn't quite as high on him, but I also didn't expect him to be the 217th ranked player this year. 25 years of age, Harkless, so still very, very young. People don't realize just how young Harkless is. 21 minutes, 6.5 points, 0.8 threes, 2.7 rebounds, 0.9 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks, 50, 71, and 42% from 3. So Harkless's value, of course, there's a massive hole there on the 3 at the 3 here in Portland. You've got McCollum, you've got Lillard, you've got Aminu, you've got Nurkic, and then there's that 3 position where we had Pat Connaughton play there sometimes, Shabazz Napier play there sometimes, Evan Turner, but Harkless was the one that they wanted to do that. But he started out the season absolutely abysmally, saw his role really, really reduce. He got down to, in November and December, playing 18, 19 minutes per game, came off the bench, lost his spot, had DNP CDs, but started to pick it up as the season progressed. And over the last chunk of the season, he started to play a little bit better, averaged 12 points over his last 9 games. Did suffer an injury at the end of the season, came back for a couple of games in the playoffs after that knee injury, but was never quite the same. But before that injury, his previous 6 games before that knee injury, 17-5-2 with the 2 steals, 10-2-1 with a steal and a block, 21-5-2 with 2 steals, 17-1-1, 8-4-1, and then 16-6-4 with 4 blocks. Those are the numbers that we were hoping we'd get from him at the start of the season. It just didn't happen for big chunks of this year, unfortunately. And that knee injury was never a good thing, but he should be fine as we head into next season. The value in Harkless is in steals and blocks. He's a guy that in under 22 minutes per game almost averaged a steal and a block and a 3. So he's almost a 1-1 guy, a clear 1-1 guy per 36 minutes. And if he was to play instead of 21.6 minutes per game and played 27 minutes per game or 28 minutes per game, he would have smashed through that 1-1 mark. The problem is with a usage of 11%, with such low volume, decent field goal percentage, but low volume. He's been a 57, 50, and 50% field goal percentage guy, so strong there, but low volume, not a big influencer. It's all about getting steals, blocks, and 3s for Harkless, and that's valuable on the right team and in the right situation. Now, as I said, he is still really young. He was really strong in his advanced numbers, in his on-off stuff, his defensive box score, plus, minus, all that stuff profiled well, and I think that he should find himself in a significantly larger role as we head into next season. Hopefully he's healthy. Hopefully Stotts gives him more than 21 minutes per game, and we get a little bit more. Do we get a 3-4 percentage point boost in usage? I think that's a possibility. Could he average 10 points, 1.3 threes, 1.3 steals, 1.1 blocks? Yes. But then you don't get any rebounds, assists, and it's really going to put a cap on what he can do. I don't think he can become ever a top 80 player. I think he could sneak the top 100. He'd be an okay later round pick in a draft, because I do think that we see maybe 6 to 7 extra minutes here from Mo next season, and that should bump those numbers. And getting high steals, getting high blocks is obviously a really nice way of being able to display some fantasy value. Eddie Davis was strong this year. He is 29 though, unrestricted free agent, 78 games, 19 minutes, 5 and 7.5 with 0.7 blocks and 58%. He was the guy off the bench that if you wanted rebounds, you wanted to stream them, Ed Davis was going to get them for you. I don't know if he ends back in Portland. I don't think he will personally. I think he'll go somewhere else. I don't think he's really ever going to sniff being a standard league guy. Ranked 237th this season. I really like Davis in Toronto. I didn't like the way he was used in Memphis. I didn't like the way he was used in LA. I thought he really could have been a 26-minute, 27-minute Derek Favors type power forward, especially the way that Favors was used this season, and that was top 100 valuable in fantasy. I don't think we're getting back to that at all with Davis. He is 29 years of age, as I mentioned already. Strong defensive stuff, really, really good rebounder, and that's where his use comes in fantasy. Evan Turner, 29 and a half years of age, 26 minutes, 8 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.6 steals, 45, 85, 32 as his percentage splits. He was the 238th ranked player this season. Yeah, look, he's just not very good. He had a PR of under 10, a really negative offensive box score, plus minus 2.4, but negative 2.4, but he is quite a good defender. On-off-wise, the team just sucks so bad when he's out there. Negative 7.7. The only players worse than him were Jake Lehman and Myers Leonard, and they played minimal minutes. Turner played over 2,000 minutes, and the fact that he played as many minutes as he did, while Mo Harkless played almost 800 less, yes, in 20 fewer games, but that's not all indicative of those games being missed there. That's really not great coaching, I don't think, from Terry Stotts. Sure, Harkless is not a great offensive player, neither is Turner, and at least one of them can hit 40% of their threes. Turner has no shot at that. He is a guy that if he's forced into a larger role, he can provide some assists, but it's not as much here in Portland as what he was doing in Philadelphia or what he was doing in Boston, because this team just doesn't create the assist or doesn't generate the assist, as we mentioned earlier, like other teams in the NBA do. Pat Connaughton, probably a successful season for Pat Connaughton. All 82 games, 18 minutes, 5 points and a 3. Does absolutely jack shit outside of shooting threes. Did that at a decent enough rate, but 35% is not really getting anyone excited. I don't see any upside for Connaughton really at all. I don't need to talk too much about Jake Lehman or Papianis or bloody Myers Leonard. Wade Baldwin, I thought, showed enough for me to say the Grizzlies shouldn't have cut him, but he's not someone who's ever going to be a top 100 player, I don't think. But the guy we want to talk about here is Zach Collins. Now, I spoke about him weeks ago in the 2017 NBA draft recap stuff, and you know that I like what Zach Collins can do, and I think that he does have eventually top 60 type upside. His numbers this year, even per 36, aren't impressive. 10 and 7.5, 1.2 triples, 0.6 steals, 1.1 blocks, 39, 65, and 30%. Piss poor. But this is a guy who I could see going 44% from the field. I could see going 80% from the free throw line. He shot 73% from the line over his last 20 games. I could see him shooting 34% from 3. I could see that true shooting going from 47 to 54 very easily next season. I could see the blocks going from 1.1 up to 1.9. The steals from 0.6, these are per 36, from 0.6 steals up to 1.1 steals per 36. I could see the points going from 10 to 15 per 36. The rebounds from 7 to 9. I could see wholesale changes to this guy's performances, not only due to increased minutes, but due to the fact that he feels more comfortable. He was lost at the start of the season. It wasn't in the rotation, didn't know what he was doing. But then around start of December, found himself in the rotation and started to put together quite a few decent performances. He still has clearly a long way to go. He's nowhere near ready to be an every night star 30-minute, 27-minute a game center. He's not at that level. But I was impressed with what he did. A negative 0.7 on-off for the season is pretty impressive. A 0.9 box score plus-minus as a rookie big man who struggled early on is something to build on, definitely. And his second half of the season was significantly better than what we saw from him earlier on. I'm going to bring up those splits between the first half, or at least post-All-Star and pre-All-Star to have a gauge of what we saw from him. He averaged a couple of extra minutes per game. He scored a little bit more. He shot considerably better. True shooting up from 45 pre-All-Star to 51 post-All-Star. Bumped his usage up in that time. Bumped his block rate up in that time. Bumped his steal rate up in that time. Some really decently impressive gains that Zach Collins made. Now, will he be a standard league guy next season? If I had to bet on it, I'd say no. But all that could change. Ed Davis goes, Jusuf Nurkic goes, depends what they bring in. If he is a player very similar to, say, Jarrett Allen in Brooklyn, is that I don't need him playing 30 minutes a night to be impactful. If he gets 24 minutes a night and they bring some other center in who plays 20 minutes a night, Zach Collins could be a top 150, top 170 guy in low 20s minutes. Probably not as impactful as Jarrett Allen because he can be a 60% field goal guy and get 2.4 blocks in that time. Zach Collins not quite there, but Collins is a 1-1 type center threat. Eventually, the threes will take a little bit of time. Who's a strong rebounder and who can hit free throws, who can hit his shots, and can improve his offensive load as well. So I am pretty big on Collins. I don't expect too much to happen next season. It could be elevated, but I think in 3 years' time, we're talking about him as a top 100 fantasy player and be able to sustain that for a few seasons in a row, which some people might be surprised at given what we saw from him this season. That'll do it, I think, for the Portland Trailblazers season recap. I'm going to have another show come out today. That's going to be the Cleveland Cavaliers, so check for that in a few hours' time. And then we'll be back next week to wrap up the season recap stuff, to wrap up the NBA draft action. Lots happening here at the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. And, of course, our Locked On NBA Network mock draft is happening over on Locked On NBA. All of the teams' individual hosts are acting as GMs. David Locke, Jeremy Wu, Jake Madison, and myself giving analysis on all the picks. At this point, 2 shows are out, so that's the first 12 picks, 6 picks per day we're doing, so make sure you're checking out that and listening, telling a friend, and debating and telling the GMs why they're wrong, why they're right, telling me why I'm wrong in my analysis, telling Jake why he's wrong while he's right. Go and check all that out over on Locked On NBA. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Jusuf Nurkic.